So tonight we are going to be starting a new series of talks called Set Free. We just got finished with what seemed like a pretty long series that we kind of started the year off with, Waves of Change. And so tonight we're starting off a new series, excited about it. And here's kind of the idea with this couple of weeks coming up. The primary purpose of Jesus when he came to earth and when he did ministry, when he lived his life here for 30 plus years, 33 years, the primary purpose of his life, I don't know that many people think about that, and, maybe that never crosses your mind. It probably doesn't, but the primary purpose of Jesus when he came to earth and when he did these miracles and when he was doing these teachings and doing this ministry, the primary purpose of his life, anybody want to take a shot on what that was? Anybody got a goal? Nate, what do you think? Set us free. He's like, I've read the title, Ridge. It's definitely to set us free. In hindsight, I probably shouldn't have asked you that. That was kind of a giveaway. But basically, a lot of people think that the reason Jesus came to earth was like to make bad people into good people, right? Which is a fair guess, but that's not why he came. Or maybe some people think, he came to, do some cool things, do some miracles, and, make people feel better, which is also not why he came. But the idea is that Jesus came to set people free. Because every single one of us is a prisoner to sin, whether or not we realize that. And that doesn't make anybody in here some terrible, awful person, because that's all of us, right? All of us are sinful. That's how we come into this world. And so Jesus comes from heaven to earth to say, hey, I would love to set you free. I would love to be the perfect you can't be, die on a cross that you would never have been able to endure to give you a life that you can't purchase for yourself. That's Jesus. And so this idea of being set free was always evident everywhere that Jesus went throughout his life. And so that's what we're going to look at for a couple of weeks. And the passage we're going to read tonight is a little bit unique. I would say this passage is probably within the top 3 of like controversial passages in the Bible. And you might say, Ridge, what does that even mean? Like, it's the Bible. What are you talking about? Well, the passage that we're going to read tonight, believe it or not, when they were translating the Bible into English, how many of you know that the Bible was not originally written in English? We kind of aware of this? Okay. So when they're translating the Bible into English from Greek and Hebrew, this story that we're going to read tonight, many of the early church fathers did not want it to be included in the English translation. You might say, Ridge, that sounds kind of bad. Why would they not want it to be in? Which, by the way, it is in the Bible. You'll see it italicized in some of your versions, and some of your versions it's in there just like every other passage. But you might say, why would that passage not be included? Well, the story that we're going to read, you're going to find out in just a minute, is very controversial. It's very radical. And a lot of the early church fathers were afraid that people would misinterpret this passage and go live crazy lives. And the interesting thing that we're going to get into in just a second is that anytime radical forgiveness, grace, mercy, pretty much the characteristics of Jesus, when that clashes with religion, religion always gets very uncomfortable. Jesus, I hope you know this, when he was living on the earth and doing ministry, he didn't have any problem with broken people. Broken people got along with Jesus just fine. The people who didn't mesh well with Jesus were the people who were self-righteous and prideful and religious. And if someone has a prideful, self-righteous, I'm the man, I'm the woman, I can do this, I got things together, that kind of heart never will mesh well with Jesus because it's contrary to his entire message. So we're going to read this story tonight. Again, a little bit of a controversial one, but it's one of my favorites, and I think it's a perfect way to start this series. So we're going to look at John chapter 8. We're going to look at verse number 1. Here we go. So it says, Jesus walked up the Mount of Olives near the city where he spent the night. And at dawn, Jesus appeared in the temple courts again. And soon all the people gathered around to listen to his words. So he sat down and taught them. So in other words, Jesus would gather around these people. He would teach them. Pretty normal, right? Like that sounds like Jesus. Then in the middle of his teaching, the religious scholars and the Pharisees were religious teachers, they broke through the crowd, and they brought a woman who had been caught in the act of committing adultery, and they made her stand in the middle of everybody. That's a pretty crazy statement, right? Like, that's a pretty crazy thing that happened. So without going into a ton of detail here, this woman is caught sleeping with somebody that has a wife that's not her, and Jesus is in the middle of teaching these people. And all of a sudden, the doors kick open. They weren't really indoors, but the doors kick open. And here comes this woman being dragged by some of these religious people. And they're basically like, hey, Jesus, look at this. We caught this woman, and she was doing some real bad stuff. So what do you think about that? How do you feel about it? Tell us right now in front of all these people while she's essentially wrapped in a bedsheet. How do you feel about what she did? Tell us right now. And this is crazy. But I mean, it's like a true story. Like this is a crazy, hard for us to wrap our minds around. But here's this woman. She gets dragged in front of all these people, completely humiliated, completely terrified, because now she's in front of Jesus and all these other religious people. Here's what the story says happens next. They said to Jesus, "Teacher, we caught this woman in the very act of adultery. Doesn't Moses' law command us to stone to death a woman like this? Tell us, what do you think we should do with her?" So some of you might not realize this, but what they were asking Jesus to do, according to their law, was for everybody to pick up a rock and throw it at her until she died. That was going to be her punishment for what she did. That's crazy, right? We have a hard time. We can't really comprehend that in 2020, but that is literally what they were suggesting should happen to this woman as a consequence for what she did. And so they said, "Jesus, what do you say? Should we stone her?" Verse 6 says, they were only testing Jesus because these religious people, they hoped to trap him with his own words and accuse him of breaking the laws of Moses. But Jesus didn't answer them. Instead, he simply bent down and wrote in the dust with his finger. Anybody, you ever have like, you ever ask somebody a question or something and they totally ignore you? You ever have that happen before and you're like, you hear what I'm saying? Like, hello, you see what you know what I mean? That ever happened to you? Yeah, okay, I appreciate it right now. They ask Jesus this question, he completely ignores them. Crazy, right? Matter of fact, not only does he ignore them, but he bends down and he starts to write in the dirt with his finger. Now, nobody knows what Jesus wrote. Bible scholars, nobody knows exactly what he was writing in the dirt. The point so much is not what he was writing, but the fact that he was totally ignoring what they were trying to get him to do. Next verse. Angry because Jesus was ignoring them, they kept insisting that he answer their question. So Jesus finally stood up and he looked at them, and here's what Jesus said. "Let's have the first man who has never had a sinful desire throw the first stone at her." And then he bent down again, wrote some more words in the dust, and let them chew on that for a second. So in other words, Jesus says, okay, yeah, what she did was sinful. If anybody in the room has never sinned, you throw the first stone at her. If you're perfect, you can throw a stone at her. He bends back down, he goes back to his own business. Upon hearing that, her accusers, all these religious people, slowly left the crowd one at a time, beginning with the oldest to the youngest, with a convicted conscience. So one by one they leave, realizing, yeah, I'm not perfect. I can't say that I've never sinned. So one by one they leave. Until finally, Jesus was left alone with the woman still standing there in front of him. Now pause real quick, because this is where the story gets a little bit scary. So who's the only person in the room that is without sin? Jesus. So everybody left the room when they realized, yeah, okay, I can't say I'm perfect. Really wanted to throw this stone, but I can't. Drop it. But finally, Jesus is the only one left. He's the one who actually is without sin. In other words, Jesus could throw a stone at her and honestly say, I'm perfect. He could do it. And so in this moment, it's like hard to imagine how afraid this woman must be, right? Like, you realize that when we do something we shouldn't do, we're afraid to pray. She did something terrible and is standing in front of Jesus Christ. You know what I'm saying? Like, can you imagine how you would feel in that moment? You would probably be literally shaking. You know, you're unsure of how to handle this. But here's how Jesus responds. Verse 11. So Jesus stood back up, and he said to her, Dear woman, where are your accusers? All the people that wanted to stone you, where are they? Is there no one here to condemn you? Looking around, she replied, I see no one, Lord. Jesus said, Then I certainly don't condemn you either. Go, and from now on be free from a life of sin. That's crazy, right? Like, here's Jesus, holy, perfect Jesus. Here's this woman caught doing something terrible. By the way, it's not like she came to Jesus and confessed, right? It's not like one night she knocks on Jesus' door. Hey, Jesus Christ, I'd like to tell you something that I've been struggling with because I just got to get this off my chest. That's not what happened. She was caught in the middle of doing it and dragged against her will before him. And yet Jesus still responds this way. which is, this is crazy, right? None of the religious people in that crowd agreed with what Jesus did. None of them understood it. It didn't make sense. And it's just like, what is Jesus doing? Why would he, I don't get it. And this story is so confusing that, again, a lot of translations, when they were making it into English, they didn't want to include this story because it didn't fit the religious paradigm. What are you going to do with this? This is radical forgiveness. This is radical grace and mercy. And so with all that in mind, while you could definitely learn a lot of different things from this passage, here's one simple thing that I want everybody in this room to think about tonight. No matter what you brought in here with you tonight, I don't know how your week has been. Maybe you've had a really bad couple of weeks. I don't know. Maybe things are going great. I hope they are. High five. But here's the big idea that I want you to think about in light of this passage. The forgiveness of Jesus is greater than your biggest failure. That's what this passage can teach everybody. Like, I don't know if we can really grasp how, like, has anybody, by show of hands, has anybody in here ever been caught doing something bad you shouldn't have been doing and you were pretty embarrassed about it? Like, it was just like, oh man, this is bad. This is real bad. You ever had that happen before? You ever been so caught that you can't even come up with a reason to blame anybody? You're like, there's no one else in the room. I don't know. I don't know. I had a friend one time, and he was so funny. Like, he got caught doing something one time, and he told this story, and every time he told the story, I'm like, dude, every time you tell this story, you make it sound like you didn't even do it. By the fifth and sixth time he told the story, he was like, bro, the devil took over my body and made me do it. I'm like, I don't really think that's how it happened. I think you just shoplifted. But anyway, so crazy. Anyway, I have some good friends. So the ironic thing about this story is that I think, obviously you can learn this from this story. The forgiveness of Jesus is greater than your biggest failure. But I think a lot of us actually see that backwards. Like, if we were just honest and we weren't at church and we were just honest with ourselves, I think a lot of us feel like there's certain things we've done that God can't forgive. Like, yeah, okay, God's going to forgive me for telling a lie or, saying a cuss word. That's like a little sin. But there's certain things we've done that we're like, yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know if God can really do that. By the way, we never see it like this, but I hope you know, it is a complete insult to Jesus Christ that we think there are certain sins he can't forgive. Like, he got up on a cross and died for us, and we're basically saying, Jesus, thank you for your efforts, but it just wasn't enough. Have we ever thought about it like that before? Like, we think our mistakes are so heavy that Jesus can't do anything with them. Jesus is like, I lived a perfect life for over 30 years. All the same struggles as a normal person, but I never sinned. And then I gave myself up, was nailed to a cross to set you free. And you think that I can't forgive you for something you did? I knew you were going to do that when I chose to hang myself on a cross. That's who Jesus is. It's crazy and it's mind-blowing, but that's who he is. And I was thinking about this. When we do mess things up, and we are going to mess things up, I try to always tell you that. We all mess things up all the time. When we have these moments of failure, I've noticed that it produces a deep sense of fear in terms of our relationship with God. Like, we get really afraid about, I don't know if I can still connect with God like I used to, or I don't know if he'll, still love me the same. I know he's got to love me because he's God, but I don't know if he really likes me anymore. That's the type of things that we think when we're struggling. But in truth, Jesus proves to us in this story that couldn't be farther from the truth. I mean, that's a complete lie, because here's this woman on the worst day of her life, and Jesus meets her with forgiveness and love. And I was thinking about this. I just said it a moment ago. If you were that woman and you were alone with Jesus, can you imagine how you would have felt? So terrified, so afraid. But as you read the story, you learn that there's actually nothing that she needed to be afraid for, because Jesus completely met her where she was at, completely forgave her and set her free. And here's what I was thinking about. Can you imagine what your life would look like if you saw Jesus for who he truly was? Because I think that a lot of us, we see a Jesus that would have thrown the first stone. That's the Jesus that a lot of us think is real. We think, yeah, he's holy, he's perfect. he probably will throw the first stone. That's why some of us walk around afraid that God's going to do bad things to us when we make a mistake. That's our concept of God. I love the way Pastor Nate was saying it on Sunday morning. He said, sometimes the God you see is the God you get. Sometimes your perspective of God dictates the reality that you experience with him, right? Have you ever had a moment where you heard something about somebody and it made you actually dislike them before you ever met them? You ever had this happen before? Like somebody has a bad experience with another person, or even a place, a bad experience at a restaurant, and you automatically determine in your mind what you think of that person or that place before you ever meet them for yourselves. Some of us have done that with Jesus. We've convinced ourselves that he's a judgmental, just awful, stern, like miserable God. That's who we think Jesus is. And this story proves to us nothing could be further from the truth. And so I was thinking about this idea of how we see Jesus, because I'm going to tell you right now, the way that you see Jesus could cause you to flee from Jesus. The way that you see, that's why people leave church. That's why people stop wanting to follow Jesus. That's why people stop praying, stop reading their Bible, because somewhere along the lines, they have so distorted who God is that they say, I don't want anything to do with him. You realize, by the way, like if you ask 10 people who don't go to church, hey, why don't you go to church? 9 out of 10, you know what they'll say? Because of the Christians that are around me, and I see how they live and I see how they act. And essentially what they're saying in translation is, I don't like the way that they treat people around them, including me. That's typically what they're saying in translation. And so they look at the Christian who represents God, how they treat people, and they say, if that's the person who apparently has God living in them, that must be God, and I don't want anything to do with that. In other words, the way that they see God causes them to flee from God. Has nothing to do with who God really is, but it's something along the line that has taken it out of context and painted it in this terrible picture. What I'm trying to say with a million words is, some of us think Jesus will throw stones at us when we make mistakes. And here's this woman making a bigger mistake than any of us have ever made in a public setting, and Jesus says, you're forgiven and you're free and I love you. That's crazy. And so what I want to do before we close is this. I just want to give you 2 simple characteristics of Jesus really quick. There's certainly a lot of things about Jesus that make him amazing and who he is. There's 2 things I want to show you. Specifically, it's that Jesus is full of grace and mercy. And you may wonder, what is grace? And I just wanted to put this definition for both these words on the screen. Grace is Jesus giving us what we don't deserve. Mercy is Jesus withholding what we do deserve. A little bit of a confusing definition, but let it sink in for a second and it will make sense. So grace is a gift. I'm going to give you something you don't deserve. Jesus gave this woman forgiveness and freedom. Did she deserve that? No. He gave it to her. That's grace. Has nothing to do with you. Grace is entirely initiated by God. Salvation's the same way, by the way. If you want to get right with God, awesome, you can. How? Because Jesus made that possible. It's grace. You just place your faith in him and receive it. That's why the Bible says it's by grace through faith that you have a relationship with God. Mercy, on the other hand, is Jesus withholding what we do deserve. So this mob of people was going to stone this woman to death. According to their law, that's what she deserved. Jesus, in his mercy, did not allow a single stone to be thrown at her. Does that make sense? Mercy is holding back what you deserve for what you did. Grace is then extending a gift to you that you don't deserve. Those are 2 of the main components of who Jesus is. Again, oftentimes we don't see that when we see Jesus. We think he's going to hate us, punish us, curse us, condemn us. That's who we think Jesus is. And the Bible over and over again teaches this is who he really is. And so as I was thinking about just kind of a way to land the plane tonight, I wanted to kind of put up a very simple verse. You've probably read this verse before. It comes from John chapter 8:36. Super simple, but I love this verse so much. It simply says, so if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. And the Son is Jesus. The message of that verse is, if Jesus sets you free, you will be free indeed. Sam, come on up here and close us, if you don't mind. And I was thinking about the last part of that passage we read. Daniel, go back to verse 11. The very ending of this passage is super cool to me, because Jesus, it says at the bottom, he looks at her and he says, I certainly don't condemn you either. Go, and from now on be free from a life of sin. like I told you, a lot of people didn't like that this passage was included in the Bible translation because they thought people would read this passage and go, hey, I can go commit adultery and Jesus is okay with that. Like, that's what they thought people would do with this passage. I can go do whatever I want, and it's cool. And maybe you've wondered before, like, okay, Rich, if Jesus is this crazy good, if he loves me this much, then does it even matter what I do? And the answer to that would be obviously yeah, because he loves you way too much to watch you be a slave to sin, right? He wants you to live in freedom. I love the way that this verse is worded because Jesus says, go and from now on be free from a life of sin. Notice that Jesus did not say, hey, go be free in a life of sin, because you can't be. Jesus wants all of us to live freely and fully and alive and abundant, and all of us are going to struggle. I'm not here telling you that if you're struggling, you're, condemned or beyond repair. But what I am saying is, don't take tonight's passage and go, hey, I can do whatever I want, and Jesus is cool with it. And that's what Rich told me, because he loves me, and it's grace. Because that's not even seeing it for what it really is. Jesus is saying, go, and from now on be free from that. I'm in you. You're no longer a slave to anything or anybody. You're free now. And another thing I love about this verse is that statement was not a threat. It was a declaration of freedom. Jesus was not saying, hey, I bailed you out this time, but if you do it again, I will stone you. That's not what he was saying. Hey, one more time, because that would be conditional, and his love is unconditional. This is crazy for some of y'all to think about, but Jesus actually looks us in the face and goes, hey, you can continue to live this way, and I'm going to love you forever. The problem is you're never going to experience the life I want you to have that way. Like, I'm going to love you the same. I had a close friend one time. It actually made me cry when he told me this. I was going through some difficult stuff. And he called me on the phone to check in on me, and he said, listen, he's like, dude, I don't really care what you do. You could go throw away your life, quit doing what you're doing at the church, move out, sell drugs, do whatever you want to do, and I will still always be your friend. He was like, dude, I just love you. I will always be your friend. But God's got big plans for you, man. And he wants more for you than that. And that encouraged me so much that day, because I didn't think about the fact that love has nothing to do with what I do or don't do. You could go every single day of your life and never honor God for a single second. Not going to change how Jesus loves you. It's going to change the reality that you get to experience as a person on this earth. And so Jesus wants more for you from that. As Sam plays this last song, I know that at the end of the night, we're all ready to go eat McDonald's and hang out. But just think about this statement. I wanted to put this on the screen, and as Sam plays, I just want you to think about this for you. The forgiveness of Jesus is greater than my blank, and I am free. I have no idea in here what your big failure is that no one knows about. I have no clue what your secret struggle is, and to be honest with you, I'm never going to pry into that and try and find that out. I've got secret struggles of my own. I don't need to worry about yours. But here's what I want you to think about as Sam plays. What goes in that blank for you that you have a hard time believing Jesus really forgives you for? What goes in that blank for you that you have a hard time believing you're really free from? And so as Sam plays this last song, I want you to have a moment of faith to believe that Jesus completely forgives you for your biggest struggle and that you're free from it and you don't have to be in that cycle any longer. I don't know what that looks like for you, but as he plays, think about that for yourself, because every single person in this place, you are forgiven and you are free. And so as he plays, I want you to think about that.